Yes, my name is Jack Chally. I'm the lead protocol specialist here at the CCC, and I want to thank everybody for making the time in your busy schedules to join us for this important topic, and wanted to also introduce the person I'm going to be presenting with, Dr. Greg Brigham.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, this is Greg Brigham. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, and my role in the CTN is that of a community treatment program representative and often as a site PI. My organization is Maryhaven, which is a community treatment program affiliated with the Ohio Valley Node, and I'm very happy to be here to talk with you about this topic today, for which I have a long interest. Having started out in the CTN in what was then called the Dissemination Subcommittee, focused on how we would get research out beyond the CTN, we had a lot of conversations back then about involving people very early in protocol development and throughout the implementation of the study, and that the more involvement and two-way interaction we had throughout that, the more likely treatments would be to be both user-friendly and adopted later. And certainly all of those concepts apply to this notion of getting buy-in to increase the performance of sites in the CTN. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Back to you, Jack.
Thanks, Greg. And that's Greg brought up several very good points. One is that we would like this to be a discussion. We certainly have some information we want to present to you guys, but we also want to hear your experiences, hear your thoughts on this and what's worked, what hasn't worked, your past experience, and so forth. We will be polling you a couple of times throughout the presentation. We'll also be having times where we open it up for open discussion, and we strongly encourage people to voice their opinions, voice their experiences, and it's really a matter of us all collectively learning together. In my 3+ years experience with the CTN now, crossing many protocols, where I sit sort of at the CCC, I span many protocols and see many different sites and many different setups and functions, and what I saw was a direct correlation between the level of buy-in and integration of the research staff within a CTP and the success of the research protocol at that site. I mean, it doesn't mean that if you don't have buy-in from everybody, you're not going to be successful. It just makes it more challenging. And the idea is to put our sites in the best position to be successful, and part of that, and sometimes I think it just gets overlooked, is really achieving buy-in throughout that entire site, and that's kind of what we're talking about and focusing on today. With that, we'll move forward to the training outline. The things we're going to try and talk to you about today are preparation for buy-in. So how do you actually do this? What are the steps involved in actually trying to communicate with a site to achieve buy-in? Buy-in is such an innocuous term, and we'll try and define it here in a few minutes. Also, how do you motivate and develop teams? So in the context of this research trial, you're going to have, as Greg brought up when we were putting this presentation together, sort of concentric circles of groups, and we have a graph representing that later on in the training. How do you develop and motivate those groups all in reference to the research trial, and so they're all sort of heading in the same direction? We'll talk about team development stages. When you've established these teams or figured out who's on these teams and really figured out what information each group and each level needs to have, how do you develop that team? How do you make that team more successful throughout the life cycle of this research trial? And then how do you overcome the communication challenges? There are going to be communication barriers. There's going to be communication challenges. Some are going to be the same for everybody. Some are going to be unique to your particular site. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about how to troubleshoot those. Troubleshooting them as a team and being aware that there are going to be communication challenges and that you're going to have to think about that and continue to think about that is really important. Now we'd like to just get a feel for sort of who's in the audience. We're going to do a couple of quick polling questions, just get some information about yourselves and your experience within the CTN, your experience within research as a whole. I'll turn it back over to Liz for the polling questions.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Okay, can you go ahead and specify your current role? Okay, I'll go ahead and show the results. All right, looks like we have a lot of research assistants and some RRTC staff.
Good. I think we have a good mix of folks here. You know, really, this training is targeted. I think everybody can gain value, and if we're able to, in this training, if we're able to sort of increase awareness of the importance of communicating and trying to achieve buy-in at all levels of the site, I think we've done our job. And so, you know, a wide group of people who are with experiences being here in different levels of the research trial itself, I think is really important. A lot of this work on the front end, especially with new sites, may fall to RRTC staff, so I'm glad to see that they're represented. And the flip side of that is the research assistants will do a lot of the day-to-day interactions with site staff, and with, you know, you may already have worked at that facility, or you may be brand new to that facility and work for the university that put you in place at that treatment center. So I think those two being the biggest groups here is a really good sign for the right group being here for this training.
Okay. Let's move to the next polling question. Can you clarify your number of years of experience with the CTN? 0 to 1 year, 2 to 3 years, or more than 3 years? I'll go ahead and show results.
It's interesting. We have it looks like some relatively new folks, some folks who've been here for a little while, and some folks who've been here for 3+ years. In a 10-year-old organization, and and 5-year-olds under this current structure, 3+ years here is quite a bit of experience, actually. That number was gathered pretty arbitrarily, actually, but it's just a good feel for we have a good mix. And I think what's important here is not only bringing your CTN experience, but all your research experience, because I think there's value. I think everybody on the line is going to bring, hopefully, valuable information to this presentation.
Okay, so now we want to know, how many CTN protocols have you worked on? Again, 0 to 1, 2 to 3, or more than 3? Okay, I'll go ahead and show results.
Great. Again, I think this is a really good mix of people who have quite a bit of CTN experience, and maybe people who don't have as much CTN experience. So I think we have a good group represented here, it seems.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, how many non-CTN clinical trials have you worked on? 0 to 1, 2 to 3, or more than 3? All right, I'll go ahead and show results.
This is interesting. So a lot of people have only had experience within the CTN, or maybe don't have much research experience at all. I think that's great. I think that fresh ideas to an organization are always incredibly valuable. The flip side of that, we have lots of people who have lots of experience outside of the CTN, and anything we can bring to the table, anything that works somewhere else, we should try and emulate and copy. So I encourage everybody to bring your ideas and bring your input to the presentation as we go through. Thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments on the information, what it looks like our representative audience is, or Greg, do you have anything?
Well, one thing I was, being egocentric as I am, I was watching for other people in my role, and I did notice that I was the only site PI that at least that clicked on the web. I'm thinking also that there are other, multiple people in the office, and probably only one person can vote if they're all sitting around a computer.
Right.
So we may have, a more diverse group than we see here. But I'm a little wondering. But I have to admit that this is the first one I've been on too. So I'm right in there with my peers in terms of attending webinars, I guess. But I think this is a good one for people in my role to have, and if they're not on the call, there might be things that I would try to think about, and I'm sure others can comment on, that would be helpful to people in that role, even though they might not be on the call. So we have a good representation of RAs, who are the real backbone of what happens at the site, I think. and they can provide, a lot of guidance to site PIs about the kind of stuff we're going to talk about here in terms of increasing site buy-in and making everything go better as a result. But that's it.
Great, and also to that point, I think we have a good number of RRTC staff here as well, who I think can be important components in sort of maybe initially making starting the communication with sites in terms of trying to achieve buy-in or working with the site PIs who may or may not be represented here today. So,
okay. Jack, I'll go ahead and turn things over to you. Presentation.
Great, thank you. So we're going to talk about preparing for buy-in. The first thing we want to do is talk about what's this word buy-in mean? What's this term? It's a relatively new term. It's one of those hot buzzwords that people talk about. For me, buy-in means people understand what's going on and they support it. They don't have to, wear the ribbon necessarily, but they believe in the cause or they believe in what's happening, or at least they understand what's happening and they're not an impediment to it. So, and it may sound, I guess it may sound simple that, everybody thinks research is a good idea and everybody's going to be involved. We've had experiences. We've had situations where at CTPs or other sites where the non-research staff just didn't understand what was going on. In some cases became barriers or had misinformation about the study or whatever the case may be, and it had a real negative impact upon the research at that site. So buy-in itself is the commitment to achieving a shared goal. So that's an interesting concept. What are the shared goals? That's when you're talking about buy-in specifically at this particular research site for this particular research study. What are those shared goals? What is the research team or the research study and the drug treatment facility have in common? Generally, they're both looking to help people with addiction issues or with some other issues. There's generally an altruistic nature to what we're doing, and so that's a very large shared goal that should be expressed with all these groups. Everybody, wants to help these clients or help these participants with these issues. That's one of the huge shared goals. There may be other things where we're on the cutting edge of a new technology. We're on the cutting edge of a new therapy that may be cheaper and better and faster. So those are other shared goals that can be talked about. Who are the stakeholders? Who's actually involved? How much are they involved? How much is at stake here for them? When you're talking about that, you're talking about the stakeholders being the research staff, the stakeholders being maybe the management and the administrative staff, the clinical staff there at the facility, the supporters. Everybody probably ideally would be a stakeholder at some level, and that's what you want to try and establish is what's their piece of this and how do you talk to them about their piece of this particular research trial. And then who facilitates this process of communicating what's going on with the research trial to try and achieve buy-in, and how does that happen? And we'll talk about that more. As Greg alluded to a few minutes ago, he's looking at this from the perspective of a site PI, and as we'll talk further, he takes a big role in trying to facilitate this at his institution. That may not make as much sense at all of our sites. The sites may be brand new. The principal investigator at that site may be brand new to the CTN. It may make more sense for it to be an RRTC staff member initially, or some other entity. So, because of the diversity and the unique structure, not only within the sites within the CTN, but also within the nodes. All the nodes do it slightly differently, and that's okay. You just have to figure out who makes the most sense, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. But really, again, buy-in is really trying to achieve a shared goal. So how do you achieve buy-in? The primary way is communication. Is effectively sharing what you're doing and explaining what the research trial is, why it has value for the participants, why it has value for the site, why it has value for the substance treatment community, what's going on. So what are the more effective types of communication? In person, talking to people, one-on-one if that makes sense, or in a group, in a setting, over a meeting that's already in place. You take 10, 15 minutes. Whatever it is, in-person communication obviously has the most value. The communication should be ongoing, and this will be a theme that we'll talk about throughout this training today. buy-in isn't achieved by talking once. You can't slap a poster on the wall and say, okay, we're doing this research trial on blah, blah, blah. Everybody bought in, good, we're ready to go now. It's not how it works. It's an ongoing communication. We talk a little bit in a few slides about sort of a rough timeline of when you could talk to these various groups about the research trial, trying to facilitate and gain that buy-in. But it needs to be going throughout the entire life cycle of the protocol. Prior to the site being selected, all the way through data lock. And then something that's really important, personalize the communication by telling the story of the trial. Who's running this trial? Where it came from? What's the idea of this trial? How was it created? Why was it created? What are the goals? What's good do you hope is going to come from it? And that will resonate with people much more than the normal things that they hear about this or that or the other. If you attach a story to it, if you make it personal and real, people will have much more of an affinity and be drawn to it. So less effective communication methods. Again, if this is the only thing you can do, it's the only thing you can do. But just sort of a blank email notification that goes to everybody at the facility, they're going to do the same thing with that email notification that you will, which if in my circumstance would be, move it to my trash folder. So you're probably not going to get very many people to read it. It's unrealistic to achieve buy-in that way. A one-time or limited conversation. So if you have a quick 2-minute talk about this research trial that's coming up, and that's it, any buy-in that you might have achieved, even in that 2-minute time frame, is going to go away. It's just going to die in the vine. Something that's overly scientific, overly research-centric, the best sort of communication is tailored to the audience. Know who the audience is, know what words are going to speak best to them in relation to your research trial and what they do and how they're impacted or how they can contribute. So tailoring the communication to the audience is going to be your best sort of communication. Other effective methods are collaboration. Actually ask questions. Have people ask questions about the research. See if they have any ideas about how to implement it at that particular site or any concerns about implementing it at that particular site. The person presenting this or trying to achieve buy-in, and again, this will be a repetitive theme throughout, should be enthusiastic, should really be behind this research, should be invested, and that conveys. If you're interested in something, if you value something, that conveys. If you're droopy and you say you're very happy, that also conveys that you're not, that you're just sort of going through the motions. And then, this involves the entire site, that everybody's going to be impacted by this, and know that up front and explain that up front. Less effective methods are going to be an expectation. We're doing this, get on board, the train's coming, it's either going to run you over or you're going to be on board with it. Same thing with demanding. If you do sort of a limited interaction, if you only involve one group or one set of groups, so we've had research trials where the management knew that the research study was going on, but none of the rest of the staff did. The research team are going to struggle because people don't know about the study, they don't know what's going on, in some circumstances, we've had a couple of different instances where staff thought that money was going to be pulled away from them or from the site itself because of the research. In other words, they were going to take clients away, money was going to be taken away, that sort of thing. So just involving a small group or a limited group of people, you never realize sort of the overall impact of not giving the information to everybody at the site, because it really is a site-wide endeavor. And I think that's what we want to talk about, and we need to try and achieve buy-in at every level at the site. It doesn't mean that you have to give every minute detail about the research study to every group, but you have to sort of figure out who needs to know what and when and how often, that sort of thing, and develop an individualized plan. And Greg, you want to talk a little bit more about how you guys do this at Maryhaven?
Sure. Well, just a couple thoughts came up, Jack, as you were talking. That was a really great overview of effective and less effective methods for communicating. And one of the things as you were talking I was thinking about is this notion that we're hoping to convey that buy-in may occur, kind of automatically if we all do a good job, but it may not. even if we are, really attending to everything that we should attend to and doing the very best job we can and doing it with integrity and enthusiasm, we may not get buy-in. And there are a large number of things that can play into that, aside from just the fact that everybody is busy and no one may even notice what we're doing. But in addition to that, they probably will notice potentially some negative things. There'll be competition for resources, for example. Many sites are short on space, as are lots of organizations. So what staff may see is people getting nudged out of offices, or an office being given to research that they had hoped to have for an intern or a clinical staff person. Or even things like space on the server, for example. We all get these messages, delete all your old email, and the server's getting slow, and get rid of this. And yet for research, we need probably larger shares of that than the typical clinical person. And so this gets out there, and so we're competing for space on the server. And these are just small examples, but there's basically competition for limited, very finite resources. And also there's this notion of, I think, interdependence, that no matter how well we do our jobs within the sort of closer to the research team, if we don't have other people on board, we're very unlikely to be successful. So we need them, and what we have to communicate is what value we can add to their lives, which is where a lot of this communication stuff comes in. But having already mentioned the sort of limited resources, one of the most limited resources is time. People are very busy at community treatment programs. They have a lot of paperwork. They have a lot of patients to attend to. At the core, the CTP often is a business that must, keep its head above water, and people are often just, dealing with the things that are flying at them each day. So I think we have to tailor our communications, and I know we'll say more about this later, but I think it's a good preview of that we have to think about who we're talking to, and a long, lengthy email, for example, to an executive is likely to get a couple of lines read, and that's about it. We have to tailor to what's important to them. So if we're talking to financial people, we have to talk about what the trial will do for the organization, in terms of bringing in indirects or revenues, or enhancing, service in the community. If it's the CEO, we might talk about community relations and, how this can increase the prestige of the center in the community for stakeholders that are important to the CEO, like their board of trustees or funders in the community. It's also nice whenever we can find an opportunity to link what we want to communicate with things that are already of interest to them. For example, I recently had an experience with this where our CEO had been reading a business publication that mentioned the FDA approval of Vivitrol, as well as the study in Russia that had evaluated Vivitrol. And, we had just had a steering committee where a Vivitrol trial had been approved for the CTN 0051. And so I was able to communicate to him something that might be coming down the road and something the CTN's involved in that was of very high interest to him, and helped him see the value and enthusiasm of being, involved in the CTN. So those are some of the immediate things. So I think it's always good to think about how we can add value to people's lives and how we can, communicate what we need to in the least invasive way, the most easily consumed way for them, and the way that helps them see that, the competition for resources is actually worth it, that there's a benefit to the organization beyond just the value of completing a trial. That's pretty much it, Chally.
Thanks, Greg. That was great. And you guys have now heard both Greg and I talk about this a little bit. We wanted to, at this point, bring you guys in and discuss this a little bit more. What have you seen? What's worked? And it didn't have to be specifically geared to buy-in, but what sort of communication that occurred, what sort of interaction or whatever at the research site have you seen that worked and made a better relationship and a facility-wide structure towards the research trial? And conversely, what have you seen that didn't work, that sort of fell on its face and just sort of didn't happen? You notice in the little bottom right corner it says interaction. We had to talk Liz off the ledge originally. It was a big watermark that was flashing at you guys. We toned it down a little bit, but we really hope that you guys are going to interact at this point. So anybody have anything? We'll go ahead and open up the phone lines. And does anybody have any experiences where, there was good communication that really led to a better working dynamic at the sites.
And if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question over the phone, you may do so by pressing *1 on your touch-tone telephone. Please make sure that your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. Again, that's *1 on your touch-tone telephone.
So I'll give everybody a second to figure that out and push *1. Are there any comments out there?
And we do have a comment from Joanne Wademan.
Great. Thanks, Joanne.
Hi. Yes, at one of our sites, we actually threw a pizza party luncheon for the entire staff, and we gave a history of the CTN and the research that we do, why we do the research that we do, how it impacts the clinic. Then we went around and we had everyone talk about if they had any experience in research and things that they would like to see changed at their research site that could perhaps, with future research, make some changes there. And that seemed to be pretty beneficial.
Great. And now, was this between research trials, it sounds like?
Actually, it was at the start of a new research trial.
That's great. And how did things go at that site?
Things went well, actually. We had to, obviously over time, everyone was busy, and, so we had to kind of do a few other little things along the way to keep people informed and interested. But it was a good way to start a trial.
Yeah, if you bring food, they will come. So
yes.
That's a strategy. Thank you very much, Joanne. Anybody else have any other comments? That's great.
And
I just want to comment on what Joanne said for a second, Jack. I like the idea of it because I think she was saying they gave sort of the history of the CTN and an opportunity for the staff there to kind of see that they're part of something bigger. I think is, very nice. A lot of times community treatment programs can be a fairly concentrated effort in a shrinking sort of world and may not have a lot of connection with larger organizations. So I think, this is a kind of a nice opportunity for them to see themselves as contributing to something much bigger than just the immediate sort of surroundings.
I totally agree, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Not only are we, when we talk about buy-in, not only are we talking about just this research trial, but the CTN as a whole, absolutely. Other comments? I think they were coming.
And we have a comment from Kathy Geary.
Okay.
George no, that's George Woody. I'm sorry. It's from TRX. One thing that I came in a little bit late, and this might have been mentioned, but I think that the money involved in these trials is worth mentioning. When we've set these things up, we've always tried to do it in a way that it makes it very clear to the administrators of the clinic that they're not losing any money, and that there's, we're talking about serious finances with these trials, and that's one thing I think is very, very important for them to work out a budget with them so that they know that they are not going to be losing money, and they could even, pick up a little bit of money by picking up part salary money for some of their personnel who would work, do the work on the study. But I think that's something we shouldn't ignore. And I agree about everything everybody said, but I think that's something that's always in the background that we need to sort of think about and bring into the discussion as well.
Absolutely, George, and I totally agree. And the other thing is not even just with the administrators or with the management staff, but it's important that the counselors or other people who are potentially impacted realize that they're not losing any client money, they're not losing any state money or any other funding source money for our research trial. That we say that to all those parties up front. We've had a couple of research trials where we had situations where the recruitment wasn't going very well at sites, and we found out actually that the counselors at the research site that weren't involved in the research thought they would lose clients to the research trial and therefore lose money, and were consciously not referring or talking people away from the research trial. So had that communication happened, they wouldn't have gone through those struggles. And eventually it did get clarified, but it was quite a ways into the trial, and lots of time and money was lost. So thank you very much, George. That's a great point. And I think, especially in these extremely challenging financial times, everybody's budgets are being cut. And so we have to not ignore that issue, but address it right up front, be up front with it, and like George said, tell them that certainly you won't cost you any money, and there may be ways to actually gain some revenue from doing the research.
And just one other thought, to make sure it's not basically an unfunded mandate on the staff, that they're not being asked to do more for the research for the same salary, that they either make extra money by doing the extra work, or their caseloads are reduced and to account for the funding. So I think that can be a little bit tricky sometimes.
Thank you very much, George. That's a great point. Anybody else have any other comments?
And we have a comment from Linda Clary.
Good morning, folks. One of the things that we do is we address community partners, and depending upon who we're talking about, we also discuss that the study in small town USA is also an economic engine. It brings a lot of money into the community, and it does produce jobs. We also go to some of our clients from former studies, or the ones that we know that are perhaps the informal leaders in the recovery population, and we tell them our story, and that has seemed to be very successful as well.
Thank you very much, Linda. So you're talking about not only the networking beyond the site itself, but out to the community, and I think that's the next logical step. It makes a lot of sense, and you know, again, the more people you have working in the direction of your successful research trial, the more successful you're going to be. So thank you very much, Linda. Anybody? Go ahead.
We do have another comment from Emily Dorr.
Hi, actually it's Frankie Kropp. I just would like to go back to something that Dr. Woody commented on, and that was the burden on staff time. One of the things that we've done in some of our community treatment programs who've participated is we've actually looked at the procedures when we were setting them up in such a way that the research staff was used to help download some tasks that could be downloaded. For example, in one site we found that the intake workers who were the primary agents for referring to the study were simply overwhelmed. And so one of the things that we did was made it part of the research assistant's duties to, on a regular basis, assist the intake worker by either taking intakes into the facility or calling with reminder calls or, you know, assisting in whatever way. That way it serves two purposes. One is it made friends with the intake workers and made them a lot more willing to provide us with referrals, and it also allowed our RA to have her finger directly on the pulse of the flow of patients into the facility.
Thanks, Frankie. That's a great idea. And again, you know, what we're talking about here is the more integration, the more collaborative we can make this research trial, the more people we have working towards a positive direction with the research trial, the more successful your site's going to be. And that's really the goal of all of this. So thank you very much, Frankie. Any other comments on what other people have said or your experiences?
And as a reminder, that is *1 if you'd like to make a comment.
We've heard a lot of great things thus far. Any sort of negative experiences where there wasn't buy-in or there wasn't communication and that caused problems with the research at the site?
And we do have a follow-up comment from Kathy Geary.
It's Woody with Kathy Geary. Sabrina and I were sitting here, we were just talking. We had one site in the 0010 study that we just thought took the money and ran. The administration, we made a deal with the administration. We thought everything was squared away, and I think that they asked the doctor to do a lot of work, and we could never prove it, but we sort of had the impression that they really didn't give the doctor any less work or more money, and they just asked her to do the study, and we got a serious amount of passive-aggressive behavior, if you can imagine. One other, so that's why I say it can be like a tricky dynamic, and a lot has to do with the relationship between the node, the ROTC and the CTP. in that regard. But then the other thing is, if you happen to have a study that helps the staff clinically, that can really get a lot of buy-in. And for example, a number of years ago, we did a study with the VA, a psychotherapy study, and what we found in the course of doing the trial was that there were some patients who had a lot of problems, and the staff would they were pretty much psychiatric problems, and the counseling staff got very frustrated, and they really didn't want to deal with them. They wanted to kick them off the program or whatever. So in the course of the study, when they had the extra therapy, these patients became more manageable. And then at the end of the study, when we asked the staff, we got some more money from the VA, we could hire another counselor or hire one of these part-time therapists. They voted to hire the part-time therapist because it took work away from, it made their lives easier. So it's just another variant of somewhat what one of the other persons said about the intake. So that's another way that you can really get serious buy-in from the staff.
Absolutely, and I think it's really important. What we're seeing here are ways where people were thinking about the study and the integration of the study and creatively realizing how they could have a positive impact on the site and utilize or leverage the resources within the research to improve things at the site. And I think doing that, you're right, is going to create a great deal of buy-in and is going to make everybody involved more successful. Thank you very much, Dr. Woody. Any other comments or comments to the comments that have been made?
And it appears that there are no further comments at this time, sir.
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you guys very much for interacting at this point. We want to keep this going throughout. We'll keep talking about some more topics, but we certainly want to hear what everybody has to say, and everybody's made wonderful contributions so far. We really appreciate it. So next we want to move towards talking about who needs to buy in. So who are the groups that we're targeting here? We've tried to break them down into 5 or 6 broad categories of people. It's going to be slightly different based upon the structure of the node, the site, or the research study itself, but we've generally broken them down like this. The core research staff of the site, the research assistants, the site PIs, the study coordinators, the people whose full-time job is research for this research study. The site PI may not be, as Greg I'm sure could attest, the site PI may not be their full-time job, but they have the overall responsibility for the research at the site. That group, I think, within the CTN generally do a very good job of having great research assistants and site coordinators who really buy in, who are really behind the research and do a great job and go above and beyond. It's the other groups that sometimes we haven't done as good of a job achieving buy-in across all the trials. So the clinical research staff involved in the research, these are the counselors and the clinicians generally that are going to be involved in the research. They may be full-time on the research or they may be part-time on the research, but these are the ones who are actually seeing study participants. And then the clinical staff affected by the research. These are going to be the counselors or the clinicians at the study who aren't necessarily seeing any of the participants in the study for research purposes, but generally see these participants in other ways within the facility. They may be their primary counselor, they may be their physician, or whatever the case may be, but they're certainly affected by the research. As these participants work through the research study, they're probably going to hear from the participants about the research study, but they're also going to know that they're involved in success or failure in the research study. This group can have a great impact upon how the participant feels about the research study. They may go back to them and talk to them about the research study. And they're doing this, they're doing that, they're making me do this, they're making me do that. If these individuals have an understanding or rudimentary understanding of the study, they can be great advocates for the study for these participants who are sharing information with them. So it's a really important group, and we're talking about concentric circles. We're getting a little further out. These people aren't actually doing anything for the research trial, but they can have a huge impact on the success or the failure of the research trial. And going forward, talking about more groups, we're talking about the administrative staff and management staff, the program managers, executive committees, board members. Again, if they don't, these are the people who sort of run these sites or run these programs, and if they don't buy in or understand or have support what's going on with this research, it may be a very difficult time to run this research trial at this facility. And then support staff members. We've already heard about this with the intake staff, the receptionists very well could be the first people that participants. We've actually had studies where we included the reception staff as research members because they actually start doing the initial recruiting for the participants. And even if they're not formally doing that, they may be informally doing that. So having them understanding the research and buying into the research study at the site is extremely important. And then there are others. Every site is going to be different and have different structures, different people involved. There may be a rotating group of interns or residents or some other people in school who are working with these participants in other capacities. Having them have some understanding of the research trial and, again, being advocates for the research trial only benefits the whole. And Greg, you want to talk about these groups a little bit more and maybe some specific examples at Maryhaven?
Sure. This is another, to me, it's another example of kind of tailoring things to these various groups. For example, the core research staff, the folks that are actually implementing the study, you know, they receive a lot of very detailed feedback from monitors and, you know, trial performance reports, and, you know, they can get very invested in improving the trial and integrating it based on that kind of nuanced data. And also, I mean, we like to have a little fun with it here and make it competitive. It has to be done in a good spirit. We don't want, you know, people to feel pressured to, you know, go beyond what can be done in high quality, but we do think of it as a competition, and it's fun to achieve and to get high recruitment rates and to get high follow-up rates and treatment exposure rates and that sort of thing, and you know, levels of accuracy and all those little things we get information back on, and I think having that feedback in a way that helps people improve really increases their investment in their work and their kind of feeling of empowerment with it. That level of detail is not as meaningful to other people in the organization. For example, the clinical staff, that's not of high interest to them. They might have some interest in knowing on how we're doing as a site, but they're more interested in the clinical implications of the research and how it's going, how it's impacting patients' involvement in treatment and so on. So this is, I think, an area where you have to think through what's of interest to them. I think George's comment earlier about the finances can't really be emphasized too much. It's a huge benefit. So when we talk to administrators and management staff, we talk not only about the current study, but the cumulative benefits. So, you know, I have my little bullet prepared of how many dollars research has brought into the organization, how that's benefited us in terms of facility and, you know, money towards other things that are a priority, how many people have been enrolled in research studies, what the results have been, and also sort of the spin-offs of that. For example, our first clinical trial was the 001 study in the CTN, which was a buprenorphine taper in a residential setting. And that basically resulted in, after the study was complete, additional funding for the organization to implement buprenorphine, as well as sort of being, you know, early adopters within the community and the things that have gone with that. And it's actually spurred a whole line of agonist treatment or medication-assisted treatment for opiates that didn't exist in the organization previously. Not all as a result of research, but certainly that's kind of where it came from. So that's of great interest and great benefit to the administrators, and so that's in the little bullet that we go through whenever we're reviewing things that are going on. But those are the obvious ones to me. Those are the core people you think about. But I like your comments about support staff also, Jack, and the importance, for example, of the receptionist, and in really little ways. For example, when we know we have good buy-in, when our receptionist sort of goes out of her way and our phones might be tied up and there's someone trying to get through to us and they know it's important to us, and they actually find a staff member to come back and knock on the door and let us know that they've got someone on the phone or in the lobby that would like to talk to us when they haven't been able to, you know, reach us directly, and they know we might not be able to get back to them. Or when they come and let us know that somebody they think might be involved in our projects is having a difficult time in the lobby or out in front of the building, and they want to make sure we know about that. So, I mean, that's just, you know, really helpful to us, and beyond what we can really expect them to do, go out of their way. But they do it if they have a feeling that they're involved in things. So we do try to keep them up to date on what's happening, and also kind of troubleshoot their role. If we're not getting that phone call often enough, and it's it's frustrating for them, we're going to go there and ask them what we can do to make their life easier. Back to you, Jack.
And thank you very much. And I think, as you were talking, Liz and I were talking here, and she brought up the really important point that, when you involve people and when you talk to people about things, they feel important or they feel part of the group, and then it matters to them and it's valuable to them, and they bring value to the situation. I think what we're hitting on here is that in communicating and investing time communicating with all of these groups plays big dividends, and in lots of dividends you won't even realize in the beginning. As a trial evolves, different people will become very important or very substantial in making it positive or negative as the research trial goes forward. At this point, we wanted to open up some more polling questions, just ask you some experience about how well you think buy-in was achieved with these various groups we've described in your previous research trials. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
Okay, thanks, Jack. So here's the first one. In your research experience, how well do you think buy-in was achieved with the core research staff at the site? Ooh, 50-50, that's cool. I'm going to go ahead and show results, but go ahead and input your responses if you haven't done so already.
This is very interesting to me. I had anticipated that fully achieved would be much higher with the core research staff. That's interesting. I think it's an important thing to note. So if we're not doing that very well, that's something that's really I think something we have to be cognizant of. And maybe again, it's this idea of assuming buy-in versus achieving buy-in. Mm-hmm. Just because somebody is hired to do the job, just because somebody is assigned to a research trial or protocol, doesn't mean they sort of buy in. It just means that's their job. So I think there is different levels and different standards there, but it's a very interesting split we have. What do you think, Greg?
Jack, I think we may have made the very mistake we've been talking about of assuming buy-in at this level, because I had the same observation as you, and I'd be fascinated to hear from people, particularly where they felt it wasn't achieved or was only semi-achieved, sort of, what are they thinking of with that?
Again, you can hit *1 and we'll open up the phone lines and talk through some of this, but please continue to contribute. We appreciate it very much.
And again, that's *1 for any questions or comments. And make sure that your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. It appears there are no comments at this time.
Okay. Well, we can keep moving forward. If you do have a comment, please feel free to hit *1 at any time, and we'll keep talking.
Okay. So in your research experience, how well do you think buy-in was achieved with clinical staff involved in the research at the site? Polls are open. All right, I'll go ahead and show results.
Again, here I think it's very interesting where the vast majority of people think it was only partially achieved or not achieved at all. I think that's why we wanted to bring this topic forward. Is buy-in is only achieved through conscious effort and continuing effort. Now, again, it's not a full-time job necessarily, but certainly it's an important piece that is easily missed or easily overlooked. And I think, again, this clinical staff, especially this clinical staff that's doing research activities at sites are critical. and getting them not only to buy into the research, but to be fully invested in the research, I think is critical to the success of our trials.
So this is another really interesting one where it looks to me like people are definitely recognizing that, that buy-in is not always fully achieved, even with folks that are directly involved in the research. And I was wondering which box I should click, as a matter of fact, because I think I've seen it both fully achieved and semi-achieved in my own setting in various studies. If we have people would like to comment about things they've done to increase buy-in of clinical staff, I'd be really interested to hear that. Some of the things we've done here is to offer, CEUs for clinical staff involved in research for the training and sometimes for the supervision received. We've provided them, of course, education about the importance of the research. We've tried to partition off time for them to do the study, and we've had problems at times when pressures from their regular clinical duties sort of made that not happen. In other words, they didn't feel that they could really let go of additional duties, even though they were sort of given permission to do it. And that's really had a negative impact on buy-in. And you can imagine the problems with semi-achieving buy-in with clinical staff in terms of getting them to, complete study procedures thoroughly and appropriately and accurately, convey enthusiasm to participants, and, do all the things that we need them to do to be successful. Did we have any callers on this one?
And we do have a comment from one of the participants on Kathy Geary's line.
Sabrina Poole. Good afternoon, everybody. One of the things that struck me was even though we constantly kept in touch with the staff, especially the counselors at particular sites, the ability to be around when they were frustrated or to be available at their meetings, even if we only stayed for the first 10 minutes, was constant. We always, it seemed, had to put out some frustrations on their part. And so I think for our part, that's why sometimes it was semi-achieved rather than fully achieved, because this is like an ongoing dynamic. Things pop up, and you always have to jump in there and sort of smooth the way so that the study stays smooth. But it's a changing dynamic, I found.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's going to be a unique dynamic across sites and across trials, and that's really what we're trying to get people to understand is there's going to be a general framework for it, but really it's going to have to be individualized to that particular trial and to that particular site. And I think how often you communicate and what ways you communicate is going to be dictated by the needs. So thank you very much for sharing that. And did you guys ultimately end up attending those meetings and being there and available to them?
Oh, we had to. I think the RA played a really important role in that regard, because even when management staff wasn't on site, the RA actually represents us, not to the point of making, larger decisions, but more or less being available for them to at least say what they were having difficulty with. For instance, a patient who was on the study but not fully complying with the clinic's rules and guidelines, but we had to consider how they were, participating with us and not participating with them, and we had to be available so that they could vocalize that to us.
Those are really interesting comments, and it brings to mind to me that it's always good to work with volunteer staff, of course, assuming the protocol, allows you to have some choice about how counselors are selected or other clinical staff. So volunteers are good rather than being assigned. But even when people volunteer to be involved, once they get involved, it's sometimes, not exactly what they expected. It's maybe more work or more demanding to comply with the manualized treatment if it's a behavioral trial. More medical involvement if it's a medical clinician in a medication trial. So I think your comments about being around and problem solving and continuing to try to maintain buy-in and encourage and help out are really important.
And maybe a practical application here is, is from a site management perspective, the node and the site management staff at the site work together to constantly be evaluating this and applying the appropriate resolutions as necessary in those circumstances, being available at those meetings. It may be training, it may be pizza parties every quarter, whatever the case may be. But I think, you know, recognizing that and stepping in to proactively resolve it, I think is great, Sabrina. I think you guys did a great job with that, and just being cognizant of it is really important as well. So thank you very much, Sabrina. Any other comments at this time?
And it appears there are no further comments at this point.
We'll move forward to the next question.
Okay, so in your research experience, how well do you think buy-in was achieved with the clinical staff affected by the research at the site? The polls are now open. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show the results.
Great. I think this trend continues, and I think that what's important to recognize here is this is an often overlooked group because the perception is they don't touch our participants for research purposes. But again, as we've alluded to earlier, if they don't understand what's going on with our research trial or have some understanding and ideally some support of our research trial, they very well could be, you know, maybe even not consciously, but have negative impacts upon our research trial. So, any comments about this group, or Greg, you want to talk about this?
Yeah. First of all, this is very affirming to me to see this poll. This is the group that, in my experience, is really the hardest to get buy-in from and to maintain it. You know, these are, to some degree, the TAU counselors. They're people that participants go into the program, either planned or unplanned, that are in our research, but the staff's not directly involved in the research project. The staff, you know, the participants make comment to the staff about what's happening in research in a way that draws negative reactions, either saying, you know, research does it better, or research is not helping me, or that sort of thing. But at any rate, they can have a lot of misinformation, and they can be, you know, sort of that group that is seeing us as competing in many different ways. So I think you know, what we've tried to do here to address this is ongoing communication, you know, being in the staff meetings with people, communicating about the trial, you know, trying to hear about the problems that are coming up and being open to, you know, receiving feedback and listening and changing operating procedures to accommodate things that are, you know, coming up, looking for ways to, you know, benefit these folks that aren't directly involved, whether it's through in-services or the brown bags and pizza parties that were mentioned by other folks on the call, linking them with resources that we might be available, that might become available, that they might like to know about. For example, one of the things that I do is, because I happen to have access to a research library, and most of my colleagues here at the center do not, I'm always open to them, you know, asking me for literature searches or to get them copies of specific articles, that kind of thing. And when I see things that might be of interest to them, I try to disseminate them. But this is I think this is a tough group to get buy-in from, and they're very important. Are there other comments from anyone in the call?
And we do have a comment from Emily Dorr.
Hi again, it's Frankie again. I just wanted to build on what Greg was saying about providing the affected clinical staff with something tangible that benefits them. One of the things, and of course here in Ohio Valley, a lot of our sites are pretty distant, and so we do not have a lot of opportunity to do things directly between the RRTC and the site. But one of the things that we have done is been very open about providing in-services or workshops to either the site or to provide community workshops in the area where the site is that focuses on a particular issue in substance abuse or substance abuse treatment or research, and then tie that back into the site and kind of showcase the site as a leader in the community. And that, I think, helps the staff who are not directly involved in the research feel a little more of a sense of pride in being a part of a facility that's a part of a research project. The other thing that we've done when sites have been close by is we've done very intensive clinical training and clinical supervision to provide to them, at no cost for things that they would ordinarily have to spend some money for. So, for example, one of the sites nearby here in the Cincinnati area, we're trained in motivational interviewing and the supervisory piece of that on an ongoing basis over the course of a year, and that was all with clinic staff who were not involved in the research itself, but who had, by virtue of coming to the meetings or the celebrations that we had said, I'd really kind of like to learn about this. Is there any way that you can get us this training? And so, I think that's one way in which your RRTC can really come in and provide some support that perhaps the site doesn't have the resources. They may have the knowledge, but they may not have the time or the availability to spend on that. That's one way that the RRTCs can come in and actually provide that benefit directly to the staff.
That's great. Thank you very much, Frankie.
Okay, let's go to the next polling question. In your research experience, how well do you think buy-in was achieved with administrative and management staff at the site? The polls are now open. I'll go ahead and show the results.
I think this is interesting. It's trending a little higher here. I think that probably makes some sense. Generally, the decision makers at the sites need to be involved and sign off on things. But I think a one-time sign off for just focusing on this group is, as we've talked about, sort of a mistake. But again, I think it makes some sense that it's critical to have the decision makers at the site and the directors of the sites to be involved and be engaged in buy-in. What do you think, Greg?
Yes. I was wondering as I was looking at this, too, I realized for myself I have, I guess, different expectations of buy-in from various groups. So I always hope for a little more buy-in from clinical staff since we're doing clinical research. And from administrative staff, I look for them more to give the sign-off to see that it's worth doing in the organization, and then if they're clinical administrators, more than that. But one of the things I've found effective at getting their buy-in and maintaining it is to keep them briefed. So I provide, for example, here we provide our executive team with monthly briefings, written and verbal, that basically overview sort of where we stand with all of the projects we've been in, kind of where they're at and being wrapped up, if they're in publications, if there's data available, and so on. Very quick bullets. And then also how we're performing in trials that are ongoing, if we're assuming we're in an ongoing trial, as well as kind of coming attractions, things that are on the horizon, things that the CTN is developing that we might be interested in, and trying to get their input on what direction they'd like to see us go in, if there are trials we might be able to apply to be involved in.
Any comments at this time?
And as a reminder, that is *1 on your touch-tone telephone if you'd like to make a comment.
Okay, in the meantime, I'll go ahead to the next polling question. In your research experience, how well do you think buy-in was achieved with support staff at the site? The polls are now open. Okay, I'll go ahead and show results.
I think the results here are pretty telling. I think that, again, this is an underrepresented group, not maybe thought of as much when we talk about who needs to know what's going on with the study, who needs to have some understanding of the study. And we've already heard several examples of how valuable and how much support and how much structure and sort of lifeblood that these staff can add to research trials. So I think just being cognizant of that when we start our communication plans or start talking to sites is really important. And Greg, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, again, I think it's very telling that this is a tough group to get buy-in from. They're busy. They're pretty far removed from the real core of our mission. But as I mentioned earlier, I think they're critically important. One of the things we've done to get buy-in, and I'm thinking again on our intake staff and our receptionists and those sort of folks, but this also spins off into maintenance staff, getting things done in a timely fashion or making modifications, our IT persons and so on. But the example I wanted to share was one of the things we did that I think was very effective with our reception staff, and that was that we became aware that one of the big challenges for them is that they were flooded with calls from very desperate people for which there wasn't always enough service available. So they had these people in crisis that they were more or less not able to help because clinical staff were all tied up, programs were full, this sort of thing. So we basically developed our own kind of standard operating procedures for how to help them with this overflow of calls. So we basically told them if they had people calling in that they could not link with clinical people, they could send those calls to us. We had what's called here at least the first link directory. That's the directory of services in the community. We have the crisis hotline numbers, that sort of thing. And we would take the time to talk with the caller, figure out a little bit of what was going on with them, and make sure they had at least the next step for what they needed to do. The receptionist was thrilled with this, because it allowed them to sort of hand off people for which they felt very uncomfortable not helping, but they didn't have someone else to give it to. And, they really kind of turned a corner with them when we did that.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. Is there any other comments about the polling question, any of the polling questions or anything we've covered thus far?
And it appears that there are no further comments at this point.
Okay, great. We're going to go back to the presentation now and talk a little bit about sort of a very rough milestone-based timeline that we've talked about for trying to secure buy-in at a CTN site. The thought being that really the best thing we can do is start the communication early. Personally, I was thinking about during the site selection phase. Since we have such a defined site selection phase in our research trials, that's a good opportunity for someone either at the RRTC or at the site to talk to the site as a whole briefly about the study, what the importance of the study is, tell the story of the study as we talked about before, and talk about why the site's being considered. And then following up, if the site's not selected for some reason, just go back and sort of closing that loop of communication to why the site wasn't selected. Maybe they didn't have the right numbers, didn't have the right this or that, or whatever the case may be, but sort of closing that loop of communication. Then, after the site's selected, having sort of defining your communication plan for that site more succinctly, talking about these groups, figuring out what information to get what groups over what method, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the slides to come. And one thing we're going to recommend here at the CCC in trials going forward is make a generalized overview slide set that's available at this time to try and standardize the communication that happens between at all the sites across the research trial. Again, just a starting off point to sort of present to the sites that's the same consistent information. And then, prior to the study launch, it's when actually, when for the core study staff, it's when they're going to the investigators meetings, when they're having their initiation visits, things like that. That's the time to have specific meetings with the greater site staff to really figure out what exactly needs to happen or how this needs to work at this particular site, or at least have those preparatory meetings. And then ultimately what we've been talking about the entire time here is that ongoing communication. We didn't sort of put that on the slide because you're going to have to really individualize that for your site. You should, if you've already started these communication steps prior to launch, you should have a pretty good feel for how and when to do that at this particular site. And we'll get into this more specifically going forward into the next section. On the next section, there's a quote we found when we were doing the prep work for this that Liz likes to call a fortune cookie quote. And it's any new initiative without staff support is like dough without yeast. Work as you might, you'll never get it to rise to success. And I think that sort of epitomizes what we're talking about here. That if you don't take the time to get the support from all these levels, then you're going to be chasing your tail a lot, and a lot of your work's going to go for naught. So, sort of expanding on what we're talking about, developing and motivating this team, or this larger team and this core team. In-person conferences, discussions, make them available to all staff. They may be targeted for specific groups, but let anybody attend who wants to learn more about the trial. Multiple sessions may be required to account for people's time, availability, to focus on the right groups, and to make sure that we meet the communication needs of all those staff groups we've talked about. Specific time points. We talked about this a little bit ago. Pre and post site selection, prior to endorsement, ongoing progress reports. It's essential, monthly managers meeting, brown bag lunches, link to the buzz. And I'm going to turn this over to Greg and let him talk a little bit about the brown bag lunches and the link to the buzz he alluded to earlier.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jack. I don't want to be too redundant, but yeah, so this was kind of laying the groundwork of having ongoing meetings where people are getting the information about what's happening in the CTN and anticipating the trial prior to the kind of steps we've already mentioned about, initial communication and site selection and so on, but also throughout that process. Brown bags, for us, are linked trials oftentimes. We give progress reports or report data on past trials. We also just do ongoing kind of research updates, bring people in, get them together, and let them know what's coming down the line to get their input, and also try to link it with the buzz. So if there's a lot of talk about motivational interviewing going on at our Summer Institute, for example, we'd like to make sure they know about the research that's been done in the CTN and the blending products and so on related to that. So the things that are of high interest to them and things they see as sort of dynamic in their world, whether it's news or clinical developments, we always look for that opportunity to link it with what's happening in the CTN. Back to you, Jack.
And now we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of the communication options. So trying to figure out what's the right mechanism. So what's the right mechanism for this group, what's available, what's realistic, what can actually work, whether it's in person, a conference call, handouts, brochures, one-on-one, small group meetings, whatever it is, trying to figure out what the right mechanism is to get the information to this group in the best and most efficient way. The right tone needs to be set. We've talked about this repeatedly, and we'll talk about this more. Being enthusiastic, showing your investment in the research and in the research trial will help foster other people's investment and buy-in. Being open, being open to what's going on and listening to what their concerns are. I think that's one of the biggest things about this too is they know their facility. They know what works. They know what challenges there are. Listen to what they say, and you may have to tailor how we're approaching things based upon what they already know about their structure, about their staff, or about their site as a whole. And be straightforward. Put out there what we're doing, what the expectations are, and what sort of what the goals are, what the milestones of the research is, and the right timing. You want to give the right information to the right group at the right time. If you give all the information about the research trial prior to the site being selected and they're never selected, you lost a lot of that. If you get all the information, after it would have been important or usable information that doesn't work. So figuring out the right timing of getting all this information to these groups is going to be key. And it's really sort of developing a communication plan or a communication guideline with this site as part of this research study. And moving forward, when you're talking about those communications, you really want to focus on, and we've talked about this some already, targeting the message to your audience. What's in it for me? How does this impact me, my clients, my interests, whatever the case may be? You can focus on the value to the community treatment program or the site. You can focus on the value of the research for all the staff, for the benefits to the research participants, the benefits to the substance abuse community as a whole, the benefits to all of those groups. As we talked about before, the monetary benefits or the reduction of workload because some of that's being taken up by research staff in the context of the research, whatever the case may be, but focus your message on this what's in it for me model, and it's much easier, it facilitates buy-in. And we talked about this a little bit before as well, selling the study and the CTN, not only explaining the value of the study, but putting them in the context of the larger network as a whole. And if you really sit back and think about it, it's pretty amazing how big and robust and multifaceted this network is that we're all associated to. And one of the things I like most about this network is what we've heard today. These experts from all over the country talking about their experiences and sharing their information and sharing their wealth of knowledge. And that's one of the biggest strengths of the CTN, in my opinion. And it has been successful in bringing research to practice. And that was the goal, to bring things from research trials actually into clinical practice, and that's been done and proven. There's more improvements to be made. There's more work to be done there, but it's a structure that works. How does this project relate to the CTN mission? How does this project how does this impact the relationship or expand the relationship of this site with the CTN? And so sort of figuring out this whole message and how to tailor this message to all of these groups is going to be essential in communicating well. And Greg, you want to talk about this a little bit more before we open up the phone lines?
Well, sure. Just for a second, we've started talking about the enthusiasm now, and that it can't be top down kind of thing. That team buy-in is important, and we've been talking. You had your cookie cutter, it was fortune cookie comments. I want to add mine, Jack. So I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, which many of you probably know is the home of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Widely acknowledged as the greatest football team in the history of the universe. And we have Coach Tressel here as our coach, which has not only read a book but actually written a book. And one of the things that he talks about is team as an acronym. Together, everyone achieves more. And while it is a cutesy thing ripped right from a motivational poster, I think it is true, and that's what we're going for, is trying to get this idea of buy-in and team spirit and getting the whole team motivated. And this enthusiasm and striking the right tone is just really a critical part of it, because in my experience, when you implement these trials, they never go exactly like you expected. And you always, or it seems like you always, in my experience at least, run into difficulties and things that didn't go as smoothly as you thought. And that's the time when, having a motivated team and the greatest amount of buy-in you can muster up to that point really kind of pays off with helping things work or not work and finding solutions. So I will take any, if people are silent on this interaction about this football team thing, I will just consider that issue settled in terms of the greatness of the Buckeyes. Back to you, Jeff.
I went to the University of Texas, and we have a winning record against you guys, but I'll let that go. Are you getting any kickbacks from Coach Russell, by the way? No, I'm just kidding. So at this time, we want to go forward and open up the phone lines again to everybody. There's Liz's little interaction icon down on the bottom there. But we're looking at, so in talking about this, what does success in achieving buy-in look like at some of the research trials and sites you've been at, or what are some examples of what success looked like or lack of success looked like? Anybody have any comments on that?
And as a reminder, that is *1 to make a comment over the phone.
I can give you a couple while people are thinking about them that I've experienced while I've been in the CTN. One of the research trials I was associated with had such a broad level of buy-in across the site that actually while the clinical trial was going on, the site staff and the site management were working to try and figure out how to implement the intervention as soon as the study ended. They got funding, they got resources, they hired staff to be trained by the research staff in doing the intervention, and as soon as the research trial ended, they implemented that. And the reason they did is because not only they knew what was going on with the research trial, but they got the feedback from their clients how much they valued this intervention. And in this particular intervention was rapid HIV testing, and what they did was they actually, like I said, they did all the legwork and the prep work while the trial was going on because they saw so early in the research trial and they knew what was going on, were being updated, that their clients really valued and wanted these services, and they found a way to make it happen. And again, as soon as they were chomping at the bit to do this, and they had to wait until the research finished, obviously, but as soon as it did, they started this and implemented this at their site, and they're still doing it today. And sort of on the opposite spectrum of things, one of the studies we had, this study struggled throughout its very lengthy life of that trial to have any buy-in really from the dispensing staff at this particular research site. And there were multiple issues because of that. You know, non-study medication was given to study participants, or the study medication that was a controlled substance wasn't accounted for very well. The study management changed over on that trial during the process of that trial, and still they tried donuts and they tried meetings and they tried various things, and not much really worked. And I don't know, but I wonder if they had established that communication chain in the very beginning of the trial, would have they been more successful? I think they would have. But it became a real problem, and as our monitors went out, the one issue that kept propping up at this site was all these issues related to the dispensing of this medication that really had very little to do with the research staff, and they had very little control over it, and it was frustrating for them. So those are some examples I saw on sort of both sides of the house. Anybody else have any examples they'd like to bring up?
And it appears that there are no further comments at this time.
Greg, you have anything else before we move on, or?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to team development stages. As we talked about earlier, when we were working through preparing this, Greg brought up the point of it being sort of like concentric circles, and this is what we thought about as we were building these slides. Is this sort of model of the core study staff actually literally being at the core of this, and then as it goes out, people have sort of less direct influence over the participants maybe, but can still have a huge impact upon the overall success or struggles of the trial. And so this is a graph that we thought pretty well represented that. We're going to move on to talking about some ways to build these teams, some ways to make these teams as functional and successful as we can. And this was actually adapted from 12 steps for building teams. In our model, not all the steps made as much sense. We tried to break it down, and I personally like the alliteration of 7 C's, so we came to the 7 C's of team building here. And the first one is clear expectations. People understand what's being asked of them, and this has come up throughout the training today, throughout the examples as well, of people being clear of what their roles are, what the staff's role, what the site staff roles are, how they're going to be interacting with the study, how they're going to be, what they're going to be asked to do for the study, what support they're going to be expected to give. And as Greg just alluded to, very rarely do things go exactly as you plan them. So these may change over time, and if they do, we have to again clarify or re-clarify those expectations and make an accommodation to make sure that works. and make sure that the interaction and the communication between these groups is clarified. I think Sabrina's example was great, where they realized that what that study needed was somebody to be in those meetings and to listen to those questions or listen to those frustrations and try and address them and try and resolve those issues right there before they grew, before they mushroomed into something larger and more difficult to deal with. The next area we talked about is context. So how does this fit in? How does this fit into what the research site does as a site as a whole? How does this fit into the CTP's mission? Maybe how does this fit into the CTN's mission? What's the potential impact on this trial? We've talked about this a great deal already. The local impact, the national impact. Does it offer the funding going forward? Greg and Frankie is on the call, and several other people on the call and I are involved in a research study right now looking at smoking cessation. And if we're able to prove in that study that smoking cessation doesn't interfere with or enhances the treatment of stimulant abuse, that may open up some funding streams for smoking cessation at drug treatment facilities, and talking through that or putting that out there up front, I think has real value as we talk about building buy-in or building these teams. So, Greg, any comments on these issues on the slide?
Jack, I think I'll just let you run through these team-building components because I think they're very well covered in your comments.
Okay, and then we'll sort of wrap it up at the end. Sounds good. Thanks, Greg. So next thing is commitment. So we want to make sure that the study staff is committed to understanding what the sites and the CTP's practices, policies, and procedures are, that we're not violating or deviating from the way that the site operates. If there's some variance or difference between what we have to do for the research and what the site does, we get that clearly hashed out before we go forward. This has happened occasionally where the site staff and the research staff have different approaches or different parameters around things, and that's caused some problems and some friction. So it's just something to think about. And as we've been talking about throughout, that the site staff or the institutional staff commits to supporting the study staff in the research trial. They understand, and they're invested, and they're part of this larger team. And it really is what we talked about in the very beginning, a shared goal, or it provides milestones, or everybody's on the same page. And as Greg alluded to a few minutes ago, together we all achieve more. And then the confidence. The study staff are confident in their training and their support and their ability to conduct the research, and that the research staff are also comfortable that they've been trained and understand what their expectations are to help support this research, and that the research staff are in a position to successfully run the research trial. Collaboration and communication, that's what we're talking about. That's all of this is and boils down to collaboration and communication. The study and the CTP staff understand that their collaboration must be ongoing, and that these groups communicating with each other and working together are vital to the project being successful. So creative value, that the research we're doing isn't something that's been done 1,000 times before, isn't something that won't prove anything, or even if it does prove something, won't have any impact or value on drug treatment as a whole, or for our participants, or for the larger community. So people believe that the research has value, and creative value in terms of being valuable to prove something that's needed in the field. And I think we've alluded to this quite a bit as well. Consequences. There are consequences. Things are going to change in relation to adding a research trial to a site. So people need to understand that changes will occur. Greg alluded to the competition for resources, whether that's space or funding or offices, whatever it is, there are going to be consequences to bringing this research in. We hope most of those consequences are positive, but some of them may be challenging. And the study staff have to understand that, work to try and mitigate them, and the site staff understands what those consequences are and are willing to accept them and work through them in addition to, to add this research to their site. So, Greg, at this point, you want to talk through some of these steps?
Well, Jack, what I was thinking of as you were talking, and thanks for running through those. They're all, really helpful things to think about in terms of building a team. We started off this section of team development with just briefly looking at these kind of concentric circles of, who's involved in the study, starting with the core study staff and then the clinical staff directly involved and those affected but not involved in management. And one of the comments was that even going beyond that into the stakeholders in the community. But these are all, part of our team, people we want to have buy-in from. And I think some of the value of these 7 C's of team building here is that, I guess what we're moving towards is having a plan for building a team and building buy-in, and that these are all elements that can go into that plan that, of course, need to be tailored to the audience based on their proximity to the trial, their, what's important to them and their role in the organization. But I think all of this contributes to things we can think about to build a better plan, and I think you covered it very well, Jack.
Thanks, Greg. So we'll go ahead and go forward into communication challenges, and then after talking about communication challenges, we'll open it up again and get comments from everybody. So, the theme here has been communicating with the sites, communicating early, often, continually, keeping those lines of communication open, figuring out who needs to be communicated with, when, how, that sort of thing. That communication is going to come with some barriers, some challenges, and we want to talk about those, talk about ways to mitigate those. And so, the thing here, the comment we put is, communication is only really achieved by consistent and sustained effort. You have to try. You have to really do it. It doesn't happen through osmosis. You can't sort of just say, oh, I told them about it once, it'll stick with them forever. It's really got to be ongoing, and as a team or as a group, you have to be committed to it. So the organizational structure, just sort of the way things are, is going to present some challenges. We talked about this, how busy people are, how available people are, how interested or affected they are is going to be some of the most important challenges to cover. And really, communication plans are one of the ways to do that. Figure out who needs to get what information when to be the most successful. And then, there's lots of different perceptions of research out there. I mean, we all work in research, so we tend to, I hope, have a pretty high opinion of it, but there may be other people who think that it's just a waste of time or it's just something else that putters up the space or distracts from what they're actually doing, and we should acknowledge that and try and understand and work through that. Or even if there's not a overt problem with research, it may just be, it's not what I do. It's not my job. I don't have anything to do with that. I'm not going to do anything additional for your silly research project. So we have to keep that in mind and keep trying to find ways to work through that, whether it's an individual or a site level. So, like we've talked about this multiple times in multiple ways, and I think that's because of how important it is to make sure that the scope of the message is right for the audience, that it's value added, that it makes sense for them, that what you're giving them is what they need, not way too much, not way too little, and try and focus on the right details for the right group. So giving people what they need to hear about this. Proximity, Frankie brought that up. One of the challenges our nodes face is managing at a distance. And how do you do that? And I think there are different plans for different sites. But, trying to figure that out, acknowledging that's a challenge, that proximity causes many communication issues. So, we're on a webinar now. I wish we were all in the same conference room, but it's probably not feasible and not practical, so we're doing the best we can to mitigate that. As allowable, go to them. And again, that's not always feasible, it's not always possible, but in-person communication tends to have the most value and the least barriers. But you can only do that as much as you can. The workload, you want to understand people's workloads. You want to try and find ways to motivate that audience to make time. We alluded to it earlier. If you feed them, they will come, if that's feasible. If you provide it in something they're already doing, weekly meetings or other structured events that they're already attending, you're going to increase the increase the likelihood that your audience will hear your message. And, you know, one of the biggest communication challenges, and I'm often accused of this, is listening. To turn around and listen to what people are saying and not just talk to them. You want to listen to what they're saying, talk with them. You know, don't talk to them. You want to make it a robust two-way communication that exists throughout the research trial. You'd be amazed as people who are working at the site alongside the research trial may be able to see things clearly, things you're struggling with. They may be able to come to you and say, I see what's going on here, and here's my suggestion, or here's my idea of how you could overcome or get past this issue. Because they have an unbiased or unaffected opinion. So it's really got to be a two-way communication system that's set up. Learning styles, understanding that there are, you know, people have a variety of learning styles that work better for them. So offering multiple things, offering visual ways to learn, auditory, experiential, you know, hands-on. People want to learn more about the research. Let them come in, let them see the assessments you're doing. Probably not with the participant if they're not cleared to, but they can see what you're actually doing with participants that are in the research study. Avoid information overload. Keep it simply simple, which I like, which is what Liz brought to us. I was in the military. I heard this KISS expression given slightly a different way, but I like this one better. And then the meeting format. You want to, again, we talked about this, understanding conflicting priorities, offer a variety of meeting formats and times, and vary the media types. But there are going to be these challenges. This is a worthwhile endeavor, and these challenges are worth overcoming because of all the things that can be gained from making it a priority to communicate with all of these various entities at the research sites. And Greg, do you want to talk about some of these challenges?
Sure. Well, I'll just maybe emphasize a couple of the points that came to mind as you were talking, Jack. Again, I think you provided a pretty good overview of them. I think the learning styles is something that's very easy to overlook, that people really absorb messages and interact with information in very different ways. And, for example, just sending an email, while that may, you know, broadcast a message to a wide audience and be very effective with some people, with others it's not. I'm always reminded of a good friend and colleague that I have here whose name I will not mention, but he still has a habit of walking down the hall to let me know he sent me an email. You know, he just hasn't quite, that email doesn't have quite the impact for him that it does for others. It's still sort of novel, and he really responds a lot better to a conversation. So when I'm thinking through my own communication challenges, and as we're doing this presentation, I'm thinking about some of those groups I've been less effective with, like the support staff and the clinical staff not directly involved in the trial. And some of the things that I've tried that I think I've gotten some good feedback from is just going and having personal communications with people that I think are important, and like the clinical staff that aren't directly involved, and talking to them about their role with the trial and why they're important in the context of the trial and what it is we need from them, if anything, and just that, you know, we value them and we appreciate it. In fact, sometimes if we you know, randomly select therapists, these may even be people who kind of didn't get selected to be in the trial and had an interest, and there's a need to really have a personal follow-up with someone in that kind of situation. So I think, you know, as looking this over, one of the take-home messages for me is going to be that with these groups that I want to do better with, you know, thinking through these communication styles and how I can be more effective with them is going to be important. That's it.
Great, Greg. Thank you very much. And now we want to go ahead and open it up to the group. As you can see, there is an interaction banner on the bottom again. So what have you found to be effective in overcoming communication challenges or barriers at the research sites with various groups? What worked, what didn't work? Any comments you may have?
And as a reminder, that is *1 to make a comment at this time over the phone. And we do have a comment from Linda Clary.
One of the things that does create a barrier for me when I go to other presentations is jargon. And I think that we all have to be very careful about using jargon, tossing around things like TAU or randomization or window of appointments. Folks don't quite get that. And it's not that we're dumbing it down, it's just that we're explaining it so that they can hear us.
Thank you, Linda. That's a great point, and we tried to allude that a little bit to that earlier in talking about not making it too research centric or something like that. But yeah, if just because it's something we use every day in our work, it doesn't make it lay language. And I think having somebody look at it specifically from that perspective, trying to find lay language or be clear, to a broad audience, I think is really important. So thank you very much, Linda. Any other comments?
And there are no further comments at this time.
All right,
Jack, I have noticed that some of the notes, because I received this in the mail, have like newsletters where they're, doing a nice kind of level publication for their node to keep them informed, and it's something that can be distributed widely amongst staff and even in the community, which seems like a nice way to communicate to staff. We have with anyone who's really important, we try to set up routine communication so that things don't just kind of fall by the wayside, or we don't wait for problems to get into problem-solving mode and do communicating. So, having people at all the key staff meetings just to sit in and watch for opportunities to be helpful or give information. And then, of course, actual meetings with people that are more closely involved in the project. I think all those can help with overcoming barriers.
And I think sort of very early sort of figuring out who needs to get this information and when, and then figuring out that sort of communication plan is important. And going forward, as we're talking about this, if there's any questions about sort of communication plans or how to implement those sorts of things, you can certainly reach out to us at the CCC, and that's something we can help you work through. And going on to sort of some key elements we thought of as a way of wrapping this training up. Key elements that you want to keep in mind as you try and achieve buy-in at the research sites. Greg, I'll let you go ahead and take the lead on the first bullet here.
Sure. Well, the notion here is, kind of who is the champion or champions for the project. We know from, research in the area of adoption of treatments and what gets maintained that the champion of a project is very, very important. And this might be a person, in some authority within an organization, or it might be a very sort of informal person who just has a lot of influence over their peers. But, having a person who is knowledgeable about what's going on, enthusiastic, and has good rapport with the staff can make a huge difference. So I think trying to have those champions, identify them, cultivate them, empower them can be very, very helpful. And I guess basically just, attitude is kind of everything. It shows in body language and voice and all types of ways that we're not always attending to, but it has a real effect on how people respond to our message.
I totally agree. And, the next bullet, it's a broken record now, but I guess the biggest thing I've seen in working in the military for a long time, working in behavioral health for a long time, is that people just presume communication is going to happen, and they presume that if they talk to somebody once, it's going to be sufficient, or that being close to somebody means that you're communicating. The only real way to communicate is through effort. You got to do it. You have to want to, and making a plan or being cognizant of how you're going to do it, and that's what moves on to the next bullet here. Site and node level communication plans. Really having a plan of how you're going to communicate with all the levels of this organization, and how frequently is going to be the key to doing that. These continued meetings, and with site staff and general site staff. And then communications regarding the recruitment goals, the targets, the strategies. I think this is sort of recapping what we've been talking about, or the core of what we've been talking about here is communicating with all these groups to add value to the research and to broaden that research team. the more people we have working at the site towards our research goals, the more successful our research will be. And with that being said, I want to, before we open it up for questions again, I want to thank Liz Buttrey for leading Greg and I through the production of these slides and of this training. It was a really good process, and I learned a lot as we went through. And I want to thank everybody for not only attending but being so active and participating in what I think was a very successful conversation about this. And it's very interesting, the polling questions we did earlier. I'd like to see us get to the point where we improve those numbers, where we get to the point where we feel like we have better buy-in at all those levels and really see the impact upon our research trials, and I think it will be tangible. And Greg, you have any other comments before we open it up for final comments from the group?
Well, just on this final sort of communication regarding goals and targets and strategies, it always makes me smile and feel like we're achieving what we're after when I hear, a round of applause go up and laughter for achieving a recruitment goal, a randomization or, hitting a level, getting a tough-to-get sort of follow-up appointment, and these are things within the team, but also seeing others, kind of celebrate that with us as they stop by to rate our candy dish and other things we do to try to welcome them into our environment. So, this environment setting and atmosphere is very important. I also wanted to thank you, Jack and Liz, for doing the heavy lifting on putting this together. It's been an interesting process, and I think I've learned a good bit from it as well, and from the participants who've interacted so far.
So, thank you very much, Greg. With that being said, we'd like to open it up for any other final comments or questions or anything at this point.
And as a final reminder, that is *1 if you would like to make a comment at this time. We'll pause for just a moment.
All right, and just while we're waiting, I want to remind everybody, if you did join today's session as a group, please be sure to send me an email and let me know who joined as part of your group so that I can assure they get credit for attending and receive a certificate.
And it appears that there are no further comments at this time.
All right, well, great. Thank you all very much, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we appreciate it, and we look forward to working with you in the future. And as a final note, the copy of this presentation, as well as all the presentations and other information, are available at the Dissemination Library and LiveLink.
Thanks very much for attending, Greg. Thank you very much for contributing to the presentation. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Again, that does conclude today's conference, and we do thank you for your participation.